Now on Inside California Politics.
We're here because of your hard work. We're here because of your resilience.
California reopens after more than a year of COVID-19 lockdowns and restrictions. What we know about a state vaccination verification system now available.
And calling for more transparency.
No country that I want to live in.
Why Congressman Eric Swalwell says the data seizure of at least 2 Democratic lawmakers by the Trump administration needs to be more closely examined.
Broadcasting across the Golden State, this is Inside California Politics.
Thanks for joining us for Inside California Politics. I'm Frank Buckley in Los Angeles.
And I'm Nikki Lorenzo in Sacramento. After more than a year in various levels of shutdowns, California fully reopened this past week. And Governor Gavin Newsom took to the stage at Universal Studios to mark the occasion, noting that although we've made a lot of progress, the pandemic is not over yet.
The state has your back as we come back. This is not a day where we announce mission accomplished, quite the contrary.
All right, so what does fully open mean? It means no more state rules on social distancing, no more limits on capacity at restaurants, bars, supermarkets, gyms, stadiums, or really anywhere else. Masks are also no longer mandated for vaccinated people in most settings, although businesses and counties can still choose to require them.
This week, the California Department of Public Health launched a new digital COVID-19 vaccine record system for vaccinated Californians. The tool allows those who are vaccinated to access their record from the state's immunization registry systems and show it to businesses or other venues that may require proof of vaccination for entry. The digital record will show the same information as the card and will include a QR code that can be scanned at venues that require vaccine verification. The state says whoever scans the code can see the information, but they cannot store it. Governor Newsom insisted they are not vaccine passports, saying it's not a passport, it's not a requirement, it's just the ability now to have an electronic version of that paper version. These digital health certificates have been hotly debated over the past few months. Critics raise privacy and equity concerns, while supporters say having proof of vaccination will ensure public safety. While the health department recommends you do keep your paper CDC card, the electronic record is meant to serve as a backup. You can sign up online. The Department of Justice Inspector General is investigating after a report revealed prosecutors in the Trump administration Justice Department subpoenaed Apple for data from the accounts of House Intelligence Committee Democrats, including at least 2 California lawmakers. Representative Adam Schiff, chair of the House Intelligence Committee, called for the investigation after finding out that his phone records, along with those of his aides, had been seized in what he is calling a terrible abuse of power. He joins us now. Chairman Schiff, what have you been told by the Department of Justice regarding the seizure of your personal data? And is it your view that this was something that is prohibited by DOJ rules, or do you believe that the action is criminal in some way?
Well, the short answer is I don't know the circumstances yet. I did receive a call from the Attorney General expressing regret about what happened and promising to have the Inspector General look into it. And I have every confidence in the Inspector General. But there's a lot I really don't know about the circumstances. I can tell you that there were about a dozen of us, members and staff of the House Intelligence Committee, that received notices from Apple that the Justice Department years ago had requested some of our records. Now, why they were requested, whether this was focused just on Democrats and whether this was the Justice Department acting on Donald Trump saying, go after my enemies, is unclear, but we certainly hope the department will get to the bottom of it, as well as Congress.
You've said that Attorney General Merrick Garland should clean house. We know that the House Judiciary Committee is moving forward with an investigation. Is that enough, or should there be more?
Well, what I've encouraged the Attorney General to do, and I think we have to do the same in Congress, is not just look at how our committee was impacted or how members of the press were impacted, and the impacts on the press were very significant too. They had the same requests for information, the same gag orders that the Justice Department went to court to prohibit press organizations from finding out that they were the subjects of these subpoenas. It goes well beyond that. It goes to the president weighing in specific cases like that involving Roger Stone, one of his advisors who lied and was convicted of lying to our committee. And then the president intervened to get him a lighter sentence and ultimately to make the case go away. Similarly, in the case of Mike Flynn, another close advisor of the president, the former national security advisor, and the president intervened and the attorney general dismissed the case against him. These are even more serious abuses. And so I think we have to look at all of the politicization of the department in the last 4 years and make sure that we take strong corrective action.
Some Republicans, including the Senate Minority Whip John Thune, agree with you that the seizure needs to be investigated. But Trump loyalists, like your colleague on the Intelligence Committee, Elise Stefanik, the House GOP conference chair, specifically accuses you of leaking and said this: there have been illegal leaks from members of Congress. That's a national security risk. That is a federal crime. It's very serious, and we want to make sure that the Department of Justice is able to pursue any type of criminal illegal leaks. What's your response to the Republican conference chair?
Well, look, Elise Stefanik got that position by being willing to lie for the former president and carry the big lie about the election. She's apparently willing to carry smaller lies for him as well. And look, I respect Liz Cheney. She had that position before Elise Stefanik. She said, I'm not willing to propagate those falsehoods. So she lost her position, and that's where the GOP is right now. They are tied to the former president, and they will carry whatever falsehoods he carries.
Only a few seconds left, but the Obama administration went after leakers as well. According to the Associated Press, it used the 1917 Espionage Act to prosecute more people under that law for leaking sensitive information to the public than all previous administrations combined. So the question is the Trump leak investigation an outlier or just part of a trend?
Well, I think it's certainly part an increase in leak prosecutions. And look, I take the holding of classified information very seriously. It's a key part of my responsibility. And I have no problem with prosecuting people who are illegally leaking classified information. But I do have a problem with essentially using the Justice Department to go after the president's enemies. And I also have a problem with the expansive use of the department's powers to go after press organizations and try to chill speech, which is what the former president was trying to do.
Chairman Schiff, thank you very much for your time, sir.
Thank you.
Coming up, calling for a closer look at former President Trump's Justice Department, why Congressman Eric Swalwell says President Trump set a dangerous precedent.
In Northern California, Congressman Eric Swalwell says former President Trump using the Justice Department to go after his political enemies is, quote, on brand. Swalwell, whose data was seized by the Trump administration as part of a leak probe, spoke with Inside California Politics contributor Joe Khalil about his concerns moving forward.
I want to start off maybe in a different way and just ask you, on a human level, what it was like to learn that not only your data, but also some associates and family members had been seized and surveilled. What was that like?
No country that I want to live in where a president would use his powers to go after his political enemies. And yeah, it's weird when you're the enemy that he's going after. But my job title is representative, and I think about the people I represent, and would they want the local mayor or the governor of our state to use powers of the community to go after them because they spoke out and exercise their right to free speech? And the answer is no. And so that's really, who I'm standing up for now when I say that this is unacceptable and people need to be held accountable.
The revelations themselves were a little bit shocking, but given what were you surprised to hear this was happening?
Donald Trump using the Department of Justice to go after his political enemies is very on brand for somebody who, during his 4 years, rewarded his friends through the Department of Justice, like Manafort, Flynn, and Stone, by making their cases go away, and used the department to go after his enemies. Also, as president, he used and leveraged foreign aid to have Ukraine try and put dirt on his political opponent, then Vice President Joe Biden. So this is very much what Donald Trump does. Now, the The fear, though, is there a trickle down here? Meaning presidents set the tone in our country. And in Donald Trump's 4 years, I think we saw Americans got meaner in some senses. People were treating healthcare workers awfully, throwing bottles at NBA players. Even decency on the House floor has broken down. And I think that is the effect of a president's tone. And the question here is the belief that he can use his Department of Justice to go after enemies, is that going to trickle down to everyday Americans, where if you show up at your city council meeting and speak out against something the mayor wants to happen, should you be looking over your shoulder for the mayor to use local law enforcement to go after you? That's what I am most concerned about.
So there was that, and then this morning we found emails that show that he was putting pressure on members of the DOJ to go after, the fraudulent election claims as well. How do you investigate this? Do you do this together? I know Judiciary yesterday announced they're going to be looking into the previous thing with your data. But as a whole, how do you take all of it and start to look into it? What's the consequence?
We have to make sure this doesn't happen again. Otherwise, you normalize it, and everyday Americans think it's okay in their own lives. And so, yes, there has to be a Judiciary Committee investigation, parallel to what the Inspector General is doing at the Department of Justice. We have different abilities in what we can look at than they do, and we should do that. But again, this goes back to Donald Trump, not like Nixon, where there was a cancer on the presidency. Donald Trump was the cancer. And whether it was the rule of law, our system of justice, or democracy itself, anything that he believed was inconvenient, he was okay to destroy. And we have to now really, I think, take an MRI, take a scan, so to speak, to look at what has been destroyed in our democracy by Donald Trump, and start to put it back in place and make sure a future corrupt leader can't do the same.
Coming up, confusion over when the recall election could happen and how much it would cost. The rules and procedures being called into question.
California's grand reopening, the state budget deadline, and new potential rules in the recall election of Governor Newsom. Cal Matters political reporter Laurel Rosenhall and LA Times Sacramento Bureau Chief John Myers join us now inside the bullpen to break down a busy week. John, a lot of folks up and down the state had June 15th circled on their calendar because, of course, that's when California was reopening. But veteran political journalists had it circled for another reason, like yourself, because it's the budget deadline, but it's pretty much procedural.
It is. The budget process has changed so dramatically in the years that I've covered it here in Sacramento. It used to be we would have these long summertime standoffs and people wouldn't get paid, state workers wouldn't get paid, IOUs were issued a couple of times. And now it's a formality because the voters changed the rules in 2010. They said you can pass a budget on a majority vote, which means just Democrats. And that's what they have been negotiating. It's important to note that the June 15th deadline now is really about lawmakers getting paid, because the ballot measure said if you don't pass a budget by June 15th, you don't get paid. It doesn't matter if it's the real budget, if it's the final budget, and it hasn't been for most years. So we've watched and waited, but it is nothing like it used to be, where there really was a demonstrable impact across California. Now it's more of a, let's see how Democrats sort it out amongst themselves.
Yeah, Laurel, there's still some negotiating going on between the Assembly Speaker, the Senate Pro Tem, and the governor.
That's right. I anticipate that it'll be a weekend full of negotiations for them to get this across the finish line. They should be announcing a deal next week. The governor there's no way he's going to blow his deadline to sign this by the end of the month. And so, they should be announcing the details. It's true that the budget that the legislature passed is not the final budget, and that it is a procedural motion. On the other hand, you could look at it and say, look, they're figuring out how to spend billions of dollars, more money than they've ever had in a state budget. And they're taking an extra week to figure it out. These things happen very fast. And, for things like, $7 billion in broadband that they've never spent before, how much to spend on high-speed rail or whether they should at all. These are big questions for the state, whether we're going to expand healthcare to undocumented immigrants starting at age 50 or 60. These are enormous spending questions, and they do seem to be taking some extra time to figure it out.
John, Laurel mentioned some of those line items right there. What are you watching?
A lot of the same things. I mean, I think the broadband thing is a great unknown out of this. I think key too is when you look at the federal relief money that California is going to get out of the most recent coronavirus relief plan that President Biden and Congress worked on. That's $27 billion with a B, the state government's going to get. So how are they divvying that up? Everybody's going to use it, but what they're using out of that versus using state tax dollars for some of these services, I think remains to be seen. The other part, though, about the budget process that I just can't help but pointing out is that in the last few years, since the rules were changed, we have seen the budget conversation drag on through the summer, through the early fall, into the next year, because there are all these bills that are related to the budget that Democrats can pass whenever they want. So some of these topics, Laurel was mentioning broadband, for example. I wouldn't be surprised to see the final strokes on all of that in August and early September. That's not blowing the deadline because it's a bill related to the budget, but it's a reminder that the budget is not a singular moment anymore. It's an ongoing through the year conversation.
All right, let's talk about the recall now, because there has been some talk over the past couple of weeks. Some Democrats want this date to be announced and this recall to happen sooner rather than later because the governor seems to have a lot of momentum right now. But John, you have some reporting. There are some officials, county election officials, that are pushing back on this, saying we're not ready just yet.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of a bizarre one to me, because folks who were paying attention to this will know that we had an estimate for what the cost of this recall was going to be really just a matter of days ago, a $215 million price tag. The problem is that price tag presumed that this election was going to be held under the same kind of rules and procedures that counties used last November. And now we have seen a budget related bill. I was talking about these budget bills. This is a bill related to the budget that proposes to change the rules to say it has to be a quote unquote regular election, not a special election, which requires more planning, more organization, more structure on the county level. And you're seeing these registrars saying, look, we can't do it for that price. And if you call this election too early, we're not convinced that we'll get everything done. I mean, printing ballots, for goodness sake, and the time frame needed for that. So I think there's a real conversation to be had here. And I think the real question for Democrats who run the legislature is, why change the rules? I mean, at this point, what does that really get you? It's not about timing. It's about all these other procedures to get the election going that I think has got a lot of concern.
And speaking of some changes, Laurel, this week, the Secretary of State put out kind of the guidelines on how to qualify for this recall election. Nothing really changed from 2003. It's 65 signatures, over $4,000. But one thing that was stuck out or was notable was the releasing of 5 years of tax returns.
Yeah, this is going to be a really interesting thing to watch, because it could trigger some lawsuits and it could have an impact on who runs against Gavin Newsom. He signed a law that was sort of a Trump trolling law pushed by Democrats in the legislature that would have required all presidential candidates and all gubernatorial candidates in California to release 5 years of tax returns to have their names appear on a primary ballot. The court struck down the part that concerned presidential candidates. The whole thing was obviously triggered by Trump defying all of the norms of releasing his tax information before during his campaign. So that part got struck down by the courts. But the part that requires candidates for governor to release their tax returns remains in effect. And now the question is whether it applies to the recall or not. The language of the law says it applies to a primary election. The recall is not a primary election.
Unfortunately, we are out of time. Laurel, John, always appreciate you joining us inside the bullpen. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up, Juneteenth, or June 19th, is now a federal holiday. Which California representatives voted against commemorating the end of slavery in the United States?
This week, President Biden signed into law a bill establishing Juneteenth National Independence Day as a federal holiday to commemorate the end of slavery in the United States. Vice President Kamala Harris explained why this date is celebrated instead of the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation.
Let us be clear about what happened on June 19th, 1865, the day we call Juneteenth. Because you see, that day was not the end of slavery in America. Yes, on that day, the enslaved people of Galveston, Texas, learned that they were free. But in fact, 2.5 years earlier, the Emancipation Proclamation ended slavery in the Confederacy. So think about that. For more than 2 years, the enslaved people of Texas were kept in servitude. For more than 2 years, they were intentionally kept from their freedom. For more than 2 years. And then on that summer day, 156 years ago, the enslaved people of Texas learned the news. They learned that they were free, and they claimed their freedom.
14 House Republicans voted against making Juneteenth a federal holiday, including 2 from Northern California, Congressman Doug LaMalfa and Congressman Tom McClintock.
You can see more of our interviews online. Just head to your local station's website and click on Inside California Politics. Thanks for watching Inside California Politics.
We'll see you back here next week.